Back when I was studying philosophy at the University of Melbourne, one of my professors asked us the following question. Who would you prefer to be, he said, Socrates dissatisfied or the pig satisfied? Now, Socrates, as you most likely know, was a famous ancient Greek philosopher, so the question is whether you would prefer to be an emotionally complex philosopher who constantly brushes up against life's imperfections, or a pig with all its needs fully met. Let's imagine this happy pig for a moment. It has an abundance of delicious food to feast on, comfy hay and mud to roll around in, shelter, shade, sunshine and water, everything it could possibly desire. As such, it's wallowing in porcine perfection. It's the height of heights for a pig. It's 10 out of 10. And poor old Socrates? For him, perfection is an impossibility. Most days his happiness levels probably hover more around 150 out of 300. Not 5 out of 10. He has a far greater possible depth of experience than the pig, but because of that depth, he's only too aware of his shortcomings, of the imperfections of life, of how he could experience so much more. And as such, he is dissatisfied. Similarly, we might ask whether you could or would prefer to be caged in a zoo, as like an animal in an exhibit, or the same animal out in the wild with all of its risks, dangers and liberty. But maybe you don't like that particular hypothetical. You don't like imagining you're an animal. Nope, you're a human and discussing animal happiness has nothing to do with you whatsoever. Okay, fine. Let's change the scenario then. You now have this choice. You can live in a 5-star high-tech apartment that lets you cater to your every whim. You can order as much Uber Eats as you desire. You can watch whatever TV, Netflix or cable TV you want. You have a massage machine, spa bath, robots to do all of your housekeeping. You even have a special drug drip machine to make you feel high whenever you wish, and all without any negative physical consequences. And you'd even have your memory erased so you can't recall anyone you know, and you'd receive a special high-tech surgery so you'd like being alone and never speaking to anyone. We would even guarantee that we'd always feel fully satisfied with life. You'd be at a 10 out of 10. And all this for just one catch. You can never leave your apartment. Would you accept that offer? I'm guessing that, like the majority of people watching this video, you wouldn't, even if it might be kind of hard to articulate exactly why, even if your average happiness levels in that apartment might be a lot higher than in regular life. Yep, something about it just wouldn't feel right. Deep down, you would suspect that in this hypothetical apartment, you wouldn't be truly living. But even so, what does this hypothetical scenario have to do with us today? What's the relevance? Well, what if we actually are heading towards something like that apartment, but are taking such microscopic steps in its direction that no one can see it? What if we're heading towards a point where we're going to voluntarily step inside that apartment, deadbolt the door and throw away the key? And what if this is all done through a classic piece of misdirection, a Trojan horse, one where we all miss what is actually going on? Now, here's where this video might get a wee bit controversial, and that leads us to what I call the Trojan horse of safety. Because from what I can tell, the powers that be are subtly manipulating us through a fear and safety campaign that has us clamoring for more protection. They're building a network of laws that will not only help keep us safe, like the animal in the zoo, but also docile and manageable. Now, if you've been reading any of my articles or watching my videos for a while, you'll know I'm no conspiracy theorist, but even so, if we want to keep our freedoms, then we need to be open our eyes to what's going on. For the more we succumb to the allure of ever-grading safety, the more we may be tightening the noose around our own necks. Now, I understand you might be watching this video and thinking to yourself, hang on, Jeremy, what are you talking about? I like these safety rules. Would you prefer to be out in the Wild West? Would you prefer to be living in some anarchic society where you could get mugged every time you walked out on the street? Well, of course I wouldn't. But even so, I'd still be happy to do without the majority of government rules and regulations that encroach on my personal freedom and autonomy. I could do without the excessive council regulations, the draconian lockdowns, and, you're ready for it, our brand new online safety laws. Now, granted, we might have differing opinions on this too. You might like these laws. You might detest those renovation cowboys who want to modify their house without the proper council tick of approval. You might celebrate legislation to stop irresponsible bogans from spreading killer viruses. You might even want stronger punishments for online trolls and people who spread disinformation. If so, point taken. We're all going to have different views on such things, but even if you like what I personally would consider excessive regulation, is it really healthy for you? Is protecting yourself from all possible dangers even good for you? Let me give you an analogy. Back in the early 1990s in the Arizona desert, a billionaire threw cash at a massive glass dome called the Biosphere 2. It was meant to replicate something we might one day create off-planet, a kind of foreshadowing of the limitless possibilities of space exploration to come. Now, to get everything right, they crammed in fake rainforests, deserts, and even a small ocean. Then they added 8 humans and sealed them inside for the next 2 years. It was meant to be a kind of self-sustaining Eden. No wind, no pests, no mess, just pure engineered perfection and a utopian template, in a sense, for generations to come. Now, at first, things seemed to be going well. Fast growers like eucalypti and figs shot up 20 to 30 feet in record time. Veggies, fruits, and wild plants cranked out bumper crops that had the harvesting crew salivating. The rainforest in the dome grew thick and lush. Desert shrubs greened up fast, and the ocean algae bloomed like it was party time. But then the first problems arose. Those eucalyptus and fig trees that had never had to deal with winds, storms, and natural weather conditions that would have helped them to develop stress wood and strong roots started to topple and snap. Their trunks flopped and they simply buckled under their own weight. And that was just the start. Soon the whole system went off the rails. Soil bugs started hogging all the oxygen. It plummeted from 21% to 14%. And before you knew it, the humans were gasping like marathoners at mile 26. Now, as a result, CO2 spiked to 4,000 ppm at night, causing crops to curl up and die. Pests exploded too. You had ants, roaches, snails. With no natural balance, the entire system began to implode. Ultimately, it was a cautionary tale of how the diversity and challenges we often fear can actually breed strength. And it's a similar story to what we've learned from the modern rise in allergies. Think about it. We've never lived in such a sanitized world, one which, intuitively speaking, should keep us safe from allergies and the like. But not so. It would seem that playing in the dirt and tumbling with sweaty, unclean animals actually strengthens our immune system and reduces the risk of developing allergies. And high exposure scenarios like we're exposed to multiple pets or farm animals actually tends to work the best. In fact, research shows that such high exposure can reduce your risk of conditions like asthma and food allergies by up to 50%. But if you doubt statistics, just look around you. Very few people my age have peanut allergies and the like. But in the modern younger generation, they're everywhere. Now, maybe you'll tell me that you were never worried about a bit of dirt, that wasn't why you wanted all the rules and regulations. That wasn't your main concern. And on this, happily, we agree, because what actually bothers me is our modern obsession with what we might call intellectual hygiene, with censorship. And here things may get controversial, for am I suggesting that we should just let people say whatever they want? Am I suggesting that we should allow people to publicly air opinions that are clearly wrong? What if, like our friend Socrates, they were seen to be misleading the youth? What if they were to incite violence? What if they were to increase social tensions? What if they were to express opinions that are hurtful to certain groups? Now, since these are emotional and nuanced issues, let's take a step back and look at things from a grander philosophical perspective. Let's take a peep at what the ancient Greeks called dialectics. Put in modern terms, this revolves around the idea of 1, a thesis, e.g. an opinion, 2, an antithesis, that is a counter-opinion, and 3, a synthesis. Now, the synthesis is a fusion of the thesis and the antithesis. It's kind of like a better version of them. It's the thesis that has learned something from the antithesis. But, and this is the key point, if we don't allow for the antithesis, how can we ever get to the synthesis? If we ban free discussion, if we silence opposition, then we'll remain forever at the level of the thesis, and as such, we'll stagnate. What's more, banning free speech rests on the assumption that we can tell right from wrong, good from bad. And as the great English philosopher John Stuart Mill stated, all silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. And this, as history has demonstrated, is wildly arrogant. Indeed, one era's certainties are another era's shame. Just think of slavery, righteous religious wars, views on women, homosexuals, race. The list goes on and on. But even so, you might say, surely some censorship is good. And possibly. Most theories, when taken to an absolute extreme, do fall apart. What's more, and it's kind of important to be upfront about this, there may not be a perfect solution. Sometimes, no matter which way you turn, you'll face challenges. And just as importantly, many decisions have second-order consequences that we often don't think about. For instance, our government locks us up during COVID to protect us from the virus, but as a result, more people suffer from depression and suicide rates go up. Or our government locks us up to protect us from the virus, and as a result, the economy collapses. And, for example, the Victorian government goes from $22.4 billion in debt on June 30, 2019 to $72.7 billion on June 30, 2021. And although we don't immediately feel the pain of those additional $50 billion of debt, plus the interest that continues to accrue, it could have been used to fund hospitals, schools, roads, public healthcare, and the like. And just as bad, it's a lot of debt that our children and grandchildren will now inherit. And this is the problem with artificially tinkering with the natural order of things like free speech. You create unforeseen problems. And talking of free speech, one of its greatest threats is the vast increase in safety laws. Laws in Western countries are growing faster than a virulent cancer, and while they come in all shapes and sizes, one of the main drivers of them is definitely concern for safety. Indeed, these days, we typically put safety on a pedestal and are happy to trade our freedom for it. This was clearly evidenced in the post-9/11 war on terrorism. At the time, sweeping laws were introduced in many countries, including Australia, that gave government agencies unprecedented power to enforce restrictions like house arrest, movement bans, monitoring, or even detention without standard criminal conviction or normal trial procedures. Now, personally, I never liked these laws, but even if some people might feel they were justified at the time, what about now? Well, now, as you might have guessed, they're still in force, because one thing governments hate doing is relinquishing power. And these laws were a hugely successful power grab. Unfortunately, while this should bother us, since most newly introduced rules or regulations don't personally affect us, we typically just let them slide by without opposition. Now, as a result, the government can introduce them one at a time without pushback. And herein lies the problem, and it's called salami tactics, or the salami slicing strategy. Now, the idea is to sidestep resistance by isolating or eliminating one small segment at a time, kind of like slicing society like a salami so that no unified opposition forms. This is precisely what Hitler did to tighten his control and eliminate undesirables. He first targeted the communist dissidents, then the socialists, then the trade unionists. From there, he turned to the various religious critics and groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses who refused loyalty. After that early period of consolidation, he escalated the persecution of the Jews, moving gradually from boycotts to the Nuremberg laws to ghettos to extermination. Then came other groups the regime considered defective or dangerous: disabled people, the Roma and Sinti, homosexual men, and others labelled asocial. Now, he could get away with this because at each step, the majority of people would breathe a sigh of relief and think something like, at least it isn't us. So when a government brings in oppressive or unjust rules that don't specifically target us, we should pay attention and, where necessary, resist these rules. What's more, we should be wary of rules that limit our freedom, all the more so since it's easy to miss the true implications of these new rules. Take, for instance, the Online Safety Amendment, which will come into force in Australia on December 10. From that date onwards, platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, X, and even Reddit and Kik will be required to take what are termed reasonable steps to prevent Australians under 16 from creating or keeping accounts. Now, I'll be honest, even though the issue is clearly nuanced, I broadly disagree with not letting children under 16 have social media accounts. I've seen lots of excellent YouTube channels by kids under 16. Mr. Beast started when he was just 13, and I have young nieces and nephews who could also do a great job. So banning them seems like a shame. Why not allow them to develop skills that could be of immense use as they grow older? But what about the dangers, you may ask? Cyberbullying, harassment, harmful content, grooming and predators. The negative possibilities are endless. And that is true. But as kids, we also played alone in the park, and there we could have met conceivably predators in the flesh. But we still played, and the vast majority of us had no issues. Now, you might say the risk is much higher online, and in some ways that will be true. But we should also ask ourselves who should be doing the caring, the state or the parents. Now, to this, I can already hear the cries. Not all parents can be trusted to take proper care of their kids. And that is also true. But just because some people might do bad things doesn't mean we should create laws that affect everyone indiscriminately. Rather, we should create laws that affect the people who actually do the bad things. As a compromise, we could at least force children to get parental consent for their accounts. And if children under 16 continue to visit disreputable websites or post disreputable content, we could then have the government intervene where required and get, say, a social worker to check up on the child and ban the account where deemed necessary. There are many things we could try before blanket banning every child. But if you still like the art of the all-wise paternalistic state, a state that is the great protector of the people, then cast your mind back to the stolen generation in Australia as a cautionary tale, because that is what can happen when the state, in all of its arrogance, thinks it knows best. Or think of the burning of witches, or the banning of things like Reiki in post-World War II Japan, no less. So, if you think that what I'm discussing has no relevance to alternative healing, think again. Anything that isn't mainstream, anything that goes against the establishment and its interest, is potentially in the legislative firing line. In any case, my qualms are not so much about banning the kids. The real sting in the tail is something I initially missed. Indeed, I suspect protecting the kids is more of a Trojan horse. The real point is that this legislation ushers us one step closer to a surveillance state. Now, I know that does sound kind of dramatic, like a grand conspiracy theory, but hear me out, because now it's not just the kids that will need to prove their age and very probably show some form of ID, it will also be the adults. That means that every search and every comment anyone makes on platforms like YouTube can now be monitored. And it gets more intense as well because from December 27, a new search engine safety code comes into force in Australia. And over the following 6 months, platforms like Google and Bing must introduce age assurance measures to restrict access to Class 1C and Class 2 material, which in practice will mean that age verification will increasingly be tied to logged in accounts. Now, no doubt we don't actually want any children accessing this stuff, as it includes pornography and the like. So in itself, it probably isn't a bad thing, but it might still prove to be a dangerous precedent, especially since the Commissioner for E-Safety can unilaterally decide what counts as Class 1 or 2 and issue removal orders that she insists apply globally. So we need to remain forever vigilant because otherwise we're in danger of a bureaucratic creep towards overreach. It starts with protecting the kids, but does it really stop there? Toss in digital ID, which in the upcoming years will be functionally required in Australia, and suddenly our every online movement will be monitored and assessed. Australia already has a habit of silencing voices that disagree with mainstream narratives, and we continually deny visas to anyone who fails our character test, a broad enough category to allow the government to do as it pleases. Because the truth is, we don't have freedom of speech in Australia, and we have never had a constitutional law to enshrine it. What we have is people like our current Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, who openly stated that he couldn't care less about freedom of speech when deciding who may enter the country. That said, none of this is overly dramatic yet. But a glance towards the UK and we might wish to pause and think. Right now, their government arrests around 30 people per day for what are deemed offensive or malicious online messages. In fact, you can get a knock on your door from the police in the UK for simply liking or retweeting a post. What's more, digital technology now gives authorities and corporations unprecedented power of surveillance and behavioral control, and this can easily degenerate into social credit systems like those in China. And once that happens, any suggestion of dissent can be punished, and all the more so when we have introduced CBDCs, i.e. central bank digital currencies, which can be frozen at the flick of a switch. Now, of course, you might still think that such things wouldn't bother you. I have nothing to hide. You may think, I'm a happy, good little law-abiding citizen. And that most likely is what most people in Nazi Germany thought while others were being persecuted. But the truth is, ultimately, few people were safe. So maybe it's like the proverbial frog being boiled alive. If the water temperature is raised slowly enough, it doesn't notice. Restrict our freedoms one teeny bit by teeny bit, and we never raise an objection. Not until it's too late. What's more, since the media feeds us a highly curated version of the news, we're typically ignorant of the things we should be objecting to. And if this sounds conspiratorial, just ask yourself whether we read the same news as they do in Russia, China, Israel, Iran, or wherever. No, each country tells its own story, and each country says it's the truth. And what's even sneakier is that beyond the simple lies the media often tells, it often curates events and ideas in ways that give us the illusion of freedom. As linguist Noam Chomsky famously observed, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. In this way, we're like the frog in the well that thinks the well is the entire world. It can hop and swim about all at once inside that well, so it thinks it's free, but how much is it really living? How much is it truly experiencing all the wonders of life? And this is the real danger of where we're heading. For fear of offending, for fear of stirring up trouble, we censor ourselves even before others can censor us. And if we do speak out, then cancel culture is ready to swoop down on us and expunge us from the face of the earth. But Ultimately, if we keep giving in to the god of fear, no one will ever need to cancel us. We will shun all dangers. We'll ask to be protected. We'll have become what Herbert Marcuse called a one-dimensional man, a flattened version of humanity, one that spins in ever narrower circles, a docile, domesticated version of ourselves without both our rougher edges and our spark, our vigor, our life. We'll be the eagle that has been trained to behave like a barnyard hen, safe, well-fed, but never soaring. Narrow our vision with media campaigns and legislation and we'll spin in ever smaller circles. The colours, the mountaintops, the exploration of ideas and philosophies that make us truly human, they will disappear from sight and mind. And as such, our life will be hollowed out of all substance and we'll become little more than living zombies. So maybe it's time to step out of the cage. Maybe it's time we recognize what spiritual seekers have long known, that it's our challenges that generally spur us towards the greatest growth. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that we all have a deeper side to us, a spirit that yearns for a deeper connection to life, to something beyond the mundane. So rather than lobbying for more safety laws and protective restrictions, maybe it's time we open the metaphorical city gates, let the outside in, and learn from a richer set of experiences. We might not like everything about those we let in. They might from time to time push our buttons, but we can't deny that they will add more colour and texture to our existence. So, while we might be safer if we keep the gates closed, and while we might be safer with a paternalistic government that erases all dissenting voices and people, will we be more fulfilled, more evolved? Or will we be making a kind of deal with the devil, selling our souls for safety and security? Like soil that without manure, decomposing matter and the like slowly degrades, like the trees in the biosphere, will our restrictive, sanitized, safe life ultimately lead to more depression, anxiety and boredom? So call me crazy, but I'd prefer to be Socrates dissatisfied. I'd prefer to risk the dangers so I can taste the full spectrum and experiences that life has to offer, even when they bring me pain. I'd prefer to be given the freedom to choose my own fate, voice my own opinions, and let others voice theirs. We can choose a glorified cage, or we can choose the vast uncertainty of life. We can give in to the god of safety, to the paternalistic society that monitors our every thought and action, or we can accept uncertainty, embrace self-responsibility, and take our chances. But here's the thing. The time for choosing is now. For if we don't decide soon, our decision will be made for us. And when the cage door slams shut, we might never find a way to open it again.